The sanctuary of Grace Fellowship Church in rural Tennessee seated maybe 300 people on a good Sunday. Old wooden pews, stained glass that flickered gold when the morning light hit it just right. A simple wooden cross above the altar that had watched over 3 generations of the same families. But on this particular Sunday morning in November, something was different. Nobody could explain it later. Not the pastor, not the deacons, not the woman who had cleaned those floors every Saturday for 19 years. They just said, and they would say it for the rest of their lives, that something was in that room, something holy. And it all started with a little girl named Lily. Lily was 7 years old. She had brown curly hair and a gap between her 2 front teeth, and she loved to draw horses in the margins of her Sunday school papers. And for the last 14 months, Lily had not walked. Not one single step. Her mother, Rachel, was 34 years old. A single mom, a woman who worked double shifts at the county hospital as a nursing aide, who drove a car that needed new brakes, who smiled at everyone she met because she had decided early in life that the world didn't need more sadness from her. Rachel had held it together through the divorce. She had held it together through the layoffs, through the move to a smaller apartment, through the nights she put Lily to bed and then sat in her kitchen and cried where her daughter couldn't hear her. But when the doctors sat her down 14 months ago and told her that Lily's condition, a rare degenerative nerve disease, was progressing faster than they had hoped, something inside Rachel cracked. Not broke, cracked, because she was a woman of faith. And faith, she had learned, is not the absence of cracks. It's what you do when the light starts coming through them. The diagnosis was devastating. The medical language was dense and cold. Words like progressive and irreversible and quality of life management. What it meant in plain English was this: Lily would likely never walk again, and the disease could continue to spread. Rachel remembered driving home from that appointment alone. Lily was with her grandmother, and she pulled into a gas station parking lot on Route 9, and she gripped that steering wheel with both hands, and she screamed. She screamed until her throat was raw, and then she whispered, through tears she couldn't stop, "God, I don't understand, but I'm not letting go of you." That was 14 months ago. Since then, she had wheeled Lily to church every single Sunday. Rain, snow. The Sunday after Christmas when she had a fever of 101 and probably should have stayed home. She came. Because Rachel believed, even when she couldn't feel it, that showing up mattered. The congregation loved Lily. They brought her casseroles and coloring books. They prayed over her in the parking lot and in the fellowship hall and in the little prayer circle that met on Wednesday nights. Pastor David, a quiet man with kind eyes and enormous hands, had prayed for Lily more times than he could count. But the weeks turned into months, and Lily didn't walk, and Rachel kept showing up. That November Sunday started like every other one. Rachel dressed Lily in her favorite purple dress, the one with the little white buttons. She braided her hair. She made them both oatmeal with brown sugar. She loaded the wheelchair into the trunk of her car with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done the same hard thing 1,000 times and learned not to flinch. They arrived at Grace Fellowship just as the bells were ringing. The worship team was already playing softly when they rolled in. Rachel found their usual spot near the side aisle, the place where Lily could see the stained glass window with the shepherd and the sheep. It was Lily's favorite window. She had once told Rachel that the shepherd looked like he was looking for somebody and that he was happy when he found them, out of the mouths of babes. Midway through the service, Pastor David did something he had never done before. He stopped his sermon. Right in the middle of it. He was 3 pages into his notes, talking about the story of Lazarus when he just stopped. He set down his papers. He took off his glasses. And he stood there for a moment in silence, and the whole church went quiet with him because they could see something on his face, something they didn't have a name for. He said quietly, "I feel like God is telling me to stop talking and start praying." He walked down from the pulpit. He walked down the center aisle, and he stopped in front of Lily. He knelt down on the floor in front of her wheelchair, this man with his gray hair and his Sunday suit, and he took her small hands in his, and he looked at her, and he said, "Lily, can I pray for you?" She looked at her mama. Rachel nodded, and she was already crying, because that crack inside her had opened up again, that place where hope and grief live right next to each other, and you can never quite tell them apart. Lily looked back at Pastor David, and she said, in that matter-of-fact way that 7-year-olds have when they haven't learned yet to pretend about things, "Yes, I want to walk. I've been asking Jesus every night." There was not a dry eye in the building. Pastor David bowed his head and he prayed. And this is the part that everyone who was there that morning would struggle to describe later. Not because nothing happened, but because of how it happened. He didn't pray loudly. He didn't perform. He prayed the way a man prays when he is not trying to impress anyone. Not the congregation, not even himself. He prayed like a man who has been broken enough by life to know that the only real posture before God is honesty. He said, "Father, we don't understand why. We've stopped trying to understand why. We just know that you are good and that you love this child more than any of us in this room are capable of loving her. And we are asking you, boldly, desperately, with everything we have, and to touch her. We are asking you to do what only you can do, not for our glory, not for a story to tell, but because you are the God who sees her, the God who sees Rachel, the God who has been in this hard, long, quiet season with them. And we trust you. Whatever you do today, we trust you." He said, "Amen." And then, silence. For a moment, nothing happened. And this is the part Rachel will tell you about when she speaks at women's retreats and in small church basements and wherever God leads her to open her mouth. She will tell you about that moment of silence, because that silence is where her faith either lived or died. She felt it, that old familiar whisper of doubt. Nothing is going to happen. It never does. You're going to go home and give her a bath and help her with homework, and she still won't walk. And then she felt something else, warmth, spreading through her hands. She was holding Lily's hand, and she felt warmth. Lily felt it too. She looked down at her legs. Her expression was something Rachel had never seen on her daughter's face before. Not excitement, not fear, something in between. Something like recognition. Like a part of her was waking up. She said, "Mama, something feels different." Rachel didn't breathe. Lily reached over and gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. She pushed herself forward to the edge of the seat. Pastor David sat back on his heels, watching, and he was shaking. The worship team had stopped playing. Every single person in Grace Fellowship Church was absolutely still. Lily put her feet on the floor. She stood up. She did not fall. She stood there, in her purple dress and her braided hair, and she stood on her own 2 feet in the middle of that old Tennessee church. And she looked at her mother, and she said, "Mama, I'm standing." Rachel did not make a sound for 3 full seconds. And then she let out a sound that is impossible to describe. Not a scream, not a cry, something deeper than both of those, something that came from a place in her that had been locked for 14 months. She dropped to her knees in front of her daughter, and she grabbed her face, and she wept, and she laughed at the same time. And Lily patted her mother's cheeks with both hands, the way little children do when they're trying to comfort someone bigger than them. And then Lily took a step, and another. 300 people witnessed it. Some of them fell to their knees where they sat. Some of them wept openly, loudly, with no embarrassment. An elderly man in the back row, a Vietnam veteran who had not cried in 40 years by his own admission, buried his face in his hands and sobbed like a child. Pastor David was still on the floor. He could not stand up. He was weeping and whispering, and the only words anyone near him could make out were, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Lily walked to the altar. She walked the whole length of that center aisle, slowly, one careful step at a time, holding her arms out slightly for balance like a tightrope walker. And when she reached the altar, she turned around and looked at the congregation, all those familiar faces, red and wet and undone. And she smiled that gap-toothed smile. And she said, "I told Jesus every night. He was listening." The doctors had no medical explanation. They ran every test available. They consulted specialists. They reviewed her scans and her blood work and her history, and at the end of it all, the neurologist who had delivered the original diagnosis, a man not given to sentiment, sat across from Rachel and said something he had never said in 22 years of practice. "I cannot explain this. Whatever happened, it did not come from medicine." Rachel thanked him. She cried in the parking garage, and then she drove to church. It was a Wednesday, and she sat in an empty pew and she talked to God for a long time. Not asking for anything, just talking, just being there. She thought about those 14 months, the double shifts and the broken car and the parking lot on Route 9, the Wednesday night prayer circles, the 100 Sundays of showing up when she felt nothing, when prayer felt like speaking into an empty room, when hope was not a feeling, but a choice she made every morning before her feet hit the floor. She understood something now that she hadn't before. The miracle was not just the walking. The miracle was what happened to her faith in the long silence before the walking. Because a faith that has never sat in the dark doesn't know its own strength. A faith that has never had to choose to believe without evidence, that faith is untested. And untested faith is fragile. Rachel's faith was not fragile anymore. She thought about the shepherd in Lily's favorite window, happy when he found them. He never stopped looking. Lily is 9 years old now. She runs. She dances. She rides a bike with training wheels in the apartment parking lot, and she is absolutely terrible at it, and she laughs every time she falls. Rachel still drives the car with the bad brakes. She's still working double shifts. Life has not become easy. It has become meaningful, which is different and better. She speaks sometimes at church, at women's events, at little gatherings of people who are in the middle of their own 14 months, their own long, quiet, dark seasons where God feels absent and prayer feels hollow, and the medical reports don't say what you need them to say. And she always tells them the same thing. She says, "I'm not standing here to tell you that God will always do what you're asking. I don't know what He's going to do in your story. I'm standing here to tell you that He is in your story. He was in every single one of those 427 days that I counted. Every day I dragged myself to church and sang songs I barely believed and prayed prayers I didn't know if anyone was hearing. He was there in the silence. He was there in the parking lot on Route 9. He was there every single night that my daughter talked to Him in the dark and trusted Him in a way that shamed my adult faith and taught me what it actually means to believe." She always pauses here. Don't you give up. Not today. Not because it's going to get easy, but because He sees you. The same God who saw a little girl in a purple dress, He sees you, and He has not looked away. In the corner of Grace Fellowship there is still a wheelchair. Pastor David asked if he could keep it. It sits beside the altar now, not as a trophy, not as a museum piece, but as a reminder that sometimes God asks us to wait, and that waiting is not the same as being forgotten. And that Sunday morning in November, the one that shocked an entire church, was never really about the miracle. It was about a God who listened to a little girl every night, and a mother who refused to stop showing up. And the moment, the holy, staggering, breathtaking moment, when heaven finally answered.